Earth looks flat, it feels flat. The logical explanation is the Earth is flat, right? But like, once you get past the crazy talk, how do we know the Earth is round? But like, once you get past the crazy talk, how do we know the Earth is round? Proving them wrong is simple, though it took hundreds of years for science to figure it out in the first place. We know the Earth is round by observing it closely. If you watch a ship as it disappears over the horizon, the bottom will vanish first, and then the top disappears later. It looks like it's sinking, kind of. That's because the Earth is curved. The Greeks first realized this 2,500 years ago and spent hundreds of years attempting to explain it. First, mathematician Pythagoras looked at the moon and discovered a curve in the line dividing the light from the shadow on its surface. That line's called the terminator. A flat moon would have a straight line. The only explanation? The moon must be a sphere. Sometime later, Anaxagoras, while watching the moon during an eclipse, realized the shadow covering the moon, that must be coming from the Earth. And that shadow was definitely curved, so the Earth must be round. So the Earth must be round. So the Earth must be round. And still later, in about 350 BC, Aristotle noted that star constellations that were visible in Greece were hidden beyond the horizon in Egypt.
His conclusion yet again was the Earth must be a sphere, just like the moon.
Sidebar, notice humanity knew the Earth was round 1,800 years before 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Just debunking some grade school crap, don't worry about it. Just debunking some grade school crap, don't worry about it. Once these great thinkers realized the Earth was curved, they wanted to prove it. A Greek astronomer named Eratosthenes figured it out. On the summer solstice, the sun reaches a peak at the top of the sky. Eratosthenes went to 2 distant locations in Egypt on the solstice and measured shadows cast by tall towers in each place. Then, using some geometry, he could calculate the curvature of the Earth between those 2 places. From there, he could extrapolate how many degrees around the circle of the Earth he had moved, ultimately revealing the circumference and diameter of the whole planet. Dang, Eratosthenes.
So by taking a shadow length and knowing the distance between the sticks, you could theoretically work out the circumference of the Earth. This method requires that the sun be a long, long way away so that the light coming from the sun is all parallel. However, it turns out that you'd get exactly the same results on a flat Earth if the sun were only 3,100 miles away and 34 miles across.
Thanks to all these ancient humans, we know the Earth is just a bit over 40,000 kilometers around the poles, which is also supported by modern observations. And knowing that, we can determine how far the horizon is from you at any given point, which changes depending on how high above sea level you are.
It's flat at sea level.
Often these skeptics cry, "Prove me wrong!" Only trust your own observations. The funny thing about that argument is that it was observation that showed us the Earth's curvature in the first place. Pythagoras observed that shadow line across the moon. Countless people have observed ships sailing underneath the horizon, not to mention the fact that we've gone to space and observed a very spherical Earth from above.
It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
And if you don't believe all of those scientists and government people for some reason, go make your own observation. Climb a mountain. Watch a ship sail over the horizon. Watch the sunset with a friend. Fly in an airplane, and behold an inarguably spherical Earth. Your move, Bob. Conspiracy theories are just the best, aren't they? Have you ever wondered why people love 9/11 conspiracies, or why we're so obsessed with the Illuminati, or which conspiracy theories might actually be true? Do you guys know anything else we should make a video debunking? Let us know down in the comments and come back here every day for more D-News.
All that meat and no potatoes, all that food to the alligators. Now all be steady, I'm really ready. Now all that meat and no potatoes.
If a pilot is flying around the curve of the Earth, then he should be dipping the nose down every 5 minutes. He should be dipping the nose down to stay around the curve. But the thing that really got me interested was, as you say, the gyroscope. In a plane, there is an artificial horizon, okay, and it's based on a gyroscope. Plane flies over a flat surface rather than a curved one, because I asked the pilot on my last flight, you know, do you ever notice the artificial horizon rolling backwards? He said no, but the artificial horizon has complex electronics in it to make sure it knows where it is on the Earth and it compensates. But I went to the manufacturer of the artificial horizon, and they confirmed to me that it's completely mechanical, nothing electronic in it whatsoever. So it's literally just a gyroscope that can freely move. So that right there is proof to me that you know, planes fly over a plane. None of it makes sense. The problem is that we're taught as children, you know, this ball Earth lie, and you know, you might ask as a child, you know, what about the people in Australia? You know, they're standing on the bottom of the globe, won't they fall off? And your teacher says, no, gravity. And you go, oh, okay. And you never go back to that question. But when you go back to it as an adult and start looking at it with a critical eye, right, the whole thing falls apart. As you say, the globe is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a leading astronomer in America,
I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
tells us that the Earth is not a perfect circle. It is actually an oblate spheroid. It's squashed and wider at the equator. Yeah.
So Earth, throughout its life, even when it formed, it was spinning, and it got a little wider at the equator than it does at the poles. So it's not actually a sphere. It's oblate, and officially it's an oblate spheroid. That's what we call it. But not only that, it's slightly wider below the equator than above the equator.
A little chubbier.
A little chubbier.
Yeah.
Chubby's a good way. It's like pear-shaped.
So my question to him would be, why is there land at the equator? Because water will move more readily than rock. So if the Earth is spinning, the water will be collected at the equator. I mean, if you spin a wet tennis ball, okay, you spin a wet tennis ball, the water shoots off at the equator, essentially. So all the water will be gathered around the equator. So why is there land at the equator? Doesn't make any sense. The other thing that's about the spinning Earth is looking at the stars. Now, directly above the axis of spin is the pole star, Polaris, okay, directly over the North Pole. And we're told that the reason that all the stars spin around the North Star is because the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Okay, seems to make sense, because if you put a long exposure camera pointing at the North Star, you'll see the stars will make perfect circles around, perfect star trails. The only problem is the Earth is also orbiting the Sun at 67,000 miles an hour. Okay, the Sun is moving, dragging the Earth and all the planets up that way or that way at 600,000 miles an hour. So why do we see perfect circles? You know, because that's the slowest speed, that's slowest motion in that mix, and yet the Earth is moving 67 times faster that way and 600 times faster that way. So you should see the stars do all sorts of strange motions, but you don't. You only see them make these perfect circles. That tells me that it's the stars that are moving, not the Earth. The thing is, what the scientists will give you is calculations and and theories why that happens. But we have experience. We see things and they either make sense or they don't make sense. What the scientists do is substitute our common sense and our intuition for calculations and theory, and we're supposed to believe the calculations rather than what we experience ourselves. There was a famous experiment back in the 1800s in England called the Bedford Levels experiment. Now, the Bedford Levels is a canal that is perfectly straight for 6 miles. Okay, so what a chap called Samuel Rowbottom did was he took a telescope, put it in the water about 8 inches above the water, and he had a friend, in a rowboat with a flag on the back, row all the way to the other end, and he was able to see the flag on the back of the rowboat the whole distance. Now, according to spherical trigonometry, the curve of the Earth is 8 inches per mile squared. So over 5 miles, that's 5 times 5, 25, times 8, which is 200, works out, that's 200 inches, which works out at 16 feet. That means the boat should have been 16 feet below the horizon. He shouldn't have been able to see the boat. Now, the scientists will say, oh, refraction and this and light bending around the Earth and stuff. But the fact is, it's perfectly flat. And he in his book, he puts forward many arguments that show that, or many experiments that show the Earth is always perfectly flat. They say that you see the mast, go down last. It's literally just the way your vision works. Yeah, it's perspective and atmospherics basically. The limit of your vision is supposedly 3 miles. And then after 3 miles, you're supposed to see the boat start to go over the horizon. It's funny that Neil deGrasse Tyson again says that, explains that you can't see the curvature of the Earth from a plane. He says this, you can't see the curvature of the Earth from a plane because you're not high enough. The Earth is so big that you can't get high enough to see the curvature. Yet, you can apparently see a boat go over the curvature over the distance of 3 miles, which doesn't make sense. The thing is, when you look out and you see a boat start to go over the horizon, if you suddenly get a pair of binoculars and look, it comes back again. And once it goes out of the sight of your binoculars, if you get a telescope, it comes back again. It doesn't go over any curve of the horizon. What we found, many people have done experiments with very high-powered zoom cameras, and they've watched a boat sail out to sea, and they've just kept trained on this boat. And what they see is, after a very long distance, you see an atmospheric effect where the bottom of the boat disappears and and the top of the boat inverts, so you see a sort of mirror image. And that, with your eyesight, basically the bottom of the boat just melts into the horizon. One of the best examples of that is the Antwerp Notre Dame spire, which can be seen something like 240 kilometers away from from the spy. So that should be over a mile below the horizon, and you can still see it. There's been a few famous examples just recently of a man who took a picture across the Great Lakes from Michigan and was able to see, I believe it's Chicago, which he shouldn't have been able to see. And the television station basically said it was a mirage.
This is from Joshua Nowicki, and what you're seeing here is a mirage. We typically would not be able to see this from the Lake Michigan shore. We talked about this last night. Conditions are right on the lake that we're actually seeing a mirage of the Chicago skyline.
But they always say it's a mirage, but for a mirage to happen, you have to have very specific atmospheric conditions. And there have been so many people who have seen exactly the same thing on different days, different seasons, always the same. It's not a mirage. It's simply that you're looking across a plane. You see in a kind of pyramid shape. Yeah, you have a horizon at your eye level, and everything above the horizon will go down into the horizon. Yeah, everything below the horizon will seem to go up. Just like if you're in a long hallway, you'll see that the walls will start to move in, and the roof and the floor will start to move into the center. Yeah, so literally between you and the object you're looking at, there's all sorts of things, sort of like waves going up and down, and while you can't see them, if they're beyond the limit of your sight, sometimes they can still obscure what you're looking at. But it's just because they're between you and it, and it's just the way. It's literally perspective. It's better if I could draw a diagram, but it's a very difficult subject to get your head around if you're not used to it. But it is perspective. One sort of other proof is there's a place in Bolivia called Salar de Uyuni, which is a salt flat. It's literally 100 miles wide one way and 80 miles across, and it's perfectly flat. And when it rains, literally you get an inch of water, and it looks like a perfect mirror. Now, how does that happen on a sphere? Yeah, it shows you that if you're one end of this salt flat, you can see perfectly clearly the other end 100 miles away. So it's just showing you that the Earth is flat, and without the effect of the waves in the sea, you'll be able to see a whole lot further. If you were to go to NASA and download one of their photos of the Earth in the moon's sky and put it in Photoshop, okay, drop the saturation and the levels down, you'll see that the Earth has been pasted in, because you'll see a rectangular box around the Earth. It's all fraud, it's all fake. Pretty much everything NASA puts out is fraudulent. There are no images of Earth from space. The only one that NASA actually claims is a photograph was from 1972, and it's the famous picture. It's got Africa sort of near the top, and it's the same picture they've been using for the last 40 or 50 years in every textbook. Every other image is what they call a composite. It's Photoshop.
There was another layer to sort of simulate the atmosphere.
And then there's this little bright spot.
It's called the specular highlight. So it's the reflection of sunlight off of water.
Those are the pieces, but you can't just slap them all together.
It just didn't look realistic. It looks kind of flat, or the clouds are sort of too see-through. So I just hit Command-Z a lot.
There's artistry to creating the world.
What I imagine it to be. Unfortunately, I'm not an astronaut. I've never been to space. But I've looked at these images over and over again, trying to sort of get the essence of it. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be. It is photoshopped, but it's has to be.
And many of us have been looking at these images of Earth, including the one they call the big blue marble, which was released in 2002, I think. Again, when you zoom into it with Photoshop, you'll see where they've used the clone tool in Photoshop to take a picture of one of the clouds and stamp it in various places around the picture. They got lazy. In another image, they've even photoshopped the word sex in the clouds, which is a subliminal tool they use to get people to sort of relate to something. They literally, you can look at this and you can find it on NASA's website. In a video I'm working on at the moment, I've got a video from what they call the Galileo space probe. As it left Earth, it took a series of shots of Earth, apparently. And you see that over the course of 25 hours, the clouds never move. Okay. Now, I happened to find some pictures of satellite pictures of Earth, and I noticed that in these separately taken satellite shots, the clouds were exactly the same as the ones in this Galileo shot. So it's a cloud map. It would be very simple indeed to just silence everybody, put an end to this topic once and for all, turn the Hubble round and show us Earth in real time, zooming in onto a place so that we can see what's happening at that place, and we know that there is something up there looking down on us from space. But they will not do it. They can't do it. It doesn't exist. It literally doesn't exist. When you go onto the plane tracking software, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of flights over the northern hemisphere, and you can track those flights from beginning to end. When you look at any flight in the southern hemisphere, what you'll find is the flight takes off and disappears off the tracking, usually about an hour after takeoff, and then later on will reappear an hour before landing. Now, there's no explanation for it. I mean, the point is that distances are very different, and distances and flight plans are very different on the flat Earth than they are on the ball. And when you look at flights in the southern hemisphere, they make some really crazy, sort of deviations. So, for instance, if we look on here, let's say a flight from Cape Town over here to Australia, say Sydney in Australia, they will take you to Dubai first, somewhere around here, yes. Just recently there was a case of a woman who was pregnant on a flight, and she was her waters broke on the flight. And I think it was from the Philippines to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And again, if you look on this map, you're from around here somewhere to here. Okay. Now they were flying across, and literally her waters broke, and they had to divert. They had to land. So instead of either going back to the Philippines or going on to Los Angeles, they landed in Alaska. Which again, if you look on the flat map, it's again a straight path. Santiago, Chile to Australia, mm-hmm. right? Will usually stop in Los Angeles. Again, you can see on the flat map that it's again a straight path. It all seems to make sense, and if the only thing that would sort of confirm it or disprove it would be GPS, but hey ho, GPS doesn't work in the southern hemisphere. This is an issue because there have been a few people who said they've taken flights that have taken only 14 hours, and they're direct flights from Australia to South America. Now, somebody has actually redrawn the flat map to take into account these the distances, and apparently the distances work out. I haven't seen the map myself, but I should be looking further into it. But yes, up until these people came forward, and again, I haven't seen any real evidence that they have taken these flights. They told me they've taken these flights, but who knows? They can actually advertise a flight that's direct. You know, they can price it out of the range of most people to take, and then if anybody does take it, they could cancel it. I don't think any flights actually fly directly over the North Pole at all. I think they skirt the North Pole, but I don't think they fly directly over the actual pole. So I don't know if it's to do with magnetics. The only thing I do know is that nothing flies over the South Pole, because again, on a flat map, the South Pole, the continent of Antarctica, is the ring around the Earth. So you know, you can't fly over the ring and get anywhere. That's why we're not allowed to go there. I mean, think about it. It's the only treaty that's you know, all these countries have signed and never broken and completely agreed on. It's the only one. And you know, what treaty is there that everybody's agreed on? We're being kept away from it for a reason. You know, they have some scientific bases there. Yeah, and literally it's controlled by the military. If you try and go there by yourself, you will be sort of picked up and escorted back. There was a guy called Jarls Anderhoy who tried to take a mission to the Antarctica, and he was picked up and taken back by the military. It's a good reason, because they don't want you finding out what's beyond. Admiral Byrd he actually did four expeditions, and most of them were military expeditions with huge military groups. You know, thousands of people, you know, planes, boats, the works. And yes, he confirmed in an interview that he discovered a continent as big as the continental United States out there, that was with warm water lakes and mountains and everything, that was completely uninhabited. And he described it as the other side of the South Pole to Middle America. So on the globe, that means it would be somewhere in the Indian Ocean. There's a huge continent that nobody knows about. So yeah, there's more going on than meets the eye. The other thing is, after Admiral Byrd came back after his last expedition, Antarctica was sealed off, and both America and the Russians started firing nuclear missiles straight up. Now, in America, that was called Operation Fishbowl, and it came under something called Project Dominic. Well, Fishbowl makes sense, because it seems like Admiral Byrd found the edge of the dome, okay, while he was out there. And as soon as he left there, they started firing missiles straight up, I believe, to try and test how far that dome went. If you look at the footage of these explosions, what you'll see is an explosion. Well, when a bomb goes off in midair, it's a fireball. It expands in all directions and mostly up. Okay. Now, if you look at these explosions on Operation Fishbowl, they explode outwards in a ring, which means it's exploding against something, because it can't rise with the heat. So it's exploding against something and exploding outwards. Okay. And the middle of the explosion, you'll see it glows, you know, hot, and then it cools over time. So it looks to me like they were exploding against a dome. Now, I said it was Operation Fishbowl, obviously Fishbowl, but there's a chap called Rob Skiba who discovered that the Project Dominic, the word Dominic means of the Lord, Fishbowl of the Lord. So I believe they clearly know that we're in an enclosed system, and Admiral Byrd found the edge, and they've tested to see how far it goes up. They will also say that if a sniper is trying to hit something a great distance, a couple of miles away, they have to take into consideration the spinning of the Earth, because they say that as the bullet leaves the muzzle of the gun, it's now independent of the rotation of the Earth. So, yeah, the Earth will spin away from where the bullet, and you have to take that into account. They say that about artillery shells as well, but it's not true. If that was true, a sniper would have to spend ages and ages calculating how to make that shot, and they don't. They literally take into consideration the wind and you know, the elevation, and they don't take the Coriolis effect into consideration at all. Also, planes. If that works for bullets, if bullets, as soon as they leave the Earth, they're now independent of the spin, then why doesn't it work for planes? Yeah, there's a video on YouTube that actually tries to explain that the Coriolis effect works by using the example of a paper plane. You have to throw it. If you throw it north, the Earth will spin and the plane will land sort of you know, east. But if you take the idea of a real plane, you know, a plane would have to aim north to go east in that case, but that's not what happens. And if that was the case as well, planes would have to land on runways that are moving, and that would be impossible. But how is it that you can take a flight from London to New York and it will take exactly the same time as a flight from New York to London? Yeah, one's with the spin of the planet and the other one's against it. So it doesn't make sense. They'll say that the whole atmosphere is moving, yeah, with the planet, but that doesn't make sense either, because you know, the atmosphere, say it's that thick, the top layer of the atmosphere will be moving slow, and as further you get in, will be moving faster. So, you know, if everything is moving like that, how do you get a light breeze that blows against the spin of the planet? You know, how do you get a breeze that goes from north to south? It just doesn't make sense. And again, science will give you calculations and you know, esoteric ideas, but you know, you can go out and look for yourself, and you'll see, you know, you'll see what makes sense and what doesn't. The other thing is that, you know, we have senses to be able to sense acceleration. Yeah, you get in a car and somebody puts their foot down, you know, and you get thrown back in your seat. You can feel the acceleration. Yeah, you can feel changes, very minute changes of acceleration. Yeah. So how is it that if you live up here in Macedonia, yeah, which is spinning at maybe 700 miles an hour, yeah, because the speed it's spinning is slower than this speed. So if you took a flight down to Africa, yeah, on the equator, why don't you feel the change in acceleration? Yeah. So why don't you feel the change in acceleration? You know, you have these senses that will register the slightest change. Yeah, but you get off the plane there and you don't feel dizzy, you know, because now you're moving a lot faster. So no, it doesn't make sense. Well, you know, you saw from his balloon, when he stepped out on the platform, you know, the curvature of the Earth. Yeah, it looked very obvious. Oh, everybody pointed it and said, "Oh, look, there's a curvature." But when you actually looked at the ground, when you looked at the Earth, well, it was New Mexico. That's where he jumped. The whole Earth that you saw there was New Mexico. So if that was a curvature, the Earth must be very, very small indeed, and New Mexico must take up a huge part of it. Yeah, it was a fisheye lens to curve that, to make that curve. And when he jumped, it took, I think it took him like 2 hours to get to that height. Yeah, he went straight up. In that 2 hours, the Earth should have rotated away quite a distance, but I think he only landed something like 70 kilometers away from where he sort of went up in the first place, and that can be you know, attributed to the wind, you know. So no, I mean that there's no proof whatsoever. There is so much to this. As I said, if you start looking and asking questions about the very basic things, you'll find that the answers you were given as a child just do not make sense. So the idea there is that it must be a globe because you know, the sun. If the sun's here, then it's got to be dark on the other side. Well, the thing about the sun is that we're told it's 93 million miles away. It's not. It's actually something around 3,000 miles away and about 34 miles across. That might sound really crazy, but if you look at look out on a day that's got broken cloud, you'll see that the sun rays will come out at an angle. Most people have seen this. The rays come down at angles. If the sun was 93 million miles away, then all the light will be coming parallel. So if you imagine, there's no way to show 93 million miles, but something way over there, all the light that reaches this globe will be parallel. There's no way that light can come that far and spread out like that. Now, if you follow those light rays, you'll see exactly where the sun is. And as I said, it works out to be about 3,100 miles. Now, if that's the case,